All right, so today is the second day of me studying. Today is damn it. Today is the second day of studying the concept of consciousness. I'm gonna read the article on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and think aloud while reading this article. So I hope it's gonna last less than 3 hours as it lasted yesterday. So I got to, I started talking too much and making unnecessary remarks. But I later rewatched it and realized that I have to make some tasks when I record these videos. It's not only about reading the articles and thinking aloud. It's also about working with pronunciation, with grammar. So I have to be more careful when I speak and see if I repeat myself over and over. I at least have to be conscious of that and then try to reduce it as much as possible. And also, I've noticed that I speak again too fast, and when I become engaged in talking, I lose the control over my speech. I mean, over my pronunciation. I don't care too much about pronunciation when I find something exciting and I start talking about it and thinking about it and connecting some ideas with my personal experience or discussing some philosophers. So it's a certain problem, and I'm going to work on it. And besides, there are many other things which I'm going to work on, but I don't want to talk about them all. So let's begin the reading. Consciousness, first published 3 June 2004. Substantiative revision January 14, 1914. All right, so perhaps no aspect of mind is more familiar or more puzzling than consciousness and our conscious experience of self and world. The problem of consciousness is arguably the central issue in current theorizing about the mind. Despite the lack of any agreed upon theory of consciousness, there is a widespread, if less than universal, consensus that an adequate account of mind requires a clear understanding of it and its place in nature. We need to understand both what consciousness is and how it relates to other non-conscious aspects of reality. All right, this is an introduction. I'm not going to talk about it too much. Basically, the whole idea is that the main idea. I always say the whole idea. What the hell does it mean? I never heard that somebody else saying that. And I have to get rid of this expression. So I have to replace it with the main idea or the basic idea or anything else. So the main idea of this paragraph is that there are many different ways of looking at the consciousness. So not everybody, but in science, there's no consensus on consciousness, what it is and how it works. But since this concept is important for science, it states that we need to understand both what it is and how it relates to other non-conscious aspects of reality. All right. So an introduction, there's the content. I'm going to briefly read through the content, the history of the issue, concepts of consciousness, creature consciousness, state consciousness, consciousness as an entity, problems of consciousness, the descriptive question, what are the features of consciousness, first person and third person data, qualitative character, phenomenal structure, subjectivity, self perspectival organization, unity, intentionality and transparency, dynamic flow, the explanatory question, how can consciousness exist, diversity of explanatory projects, the explanatory gap, reductive and non-reductive explanation, prospects of explanatory success, the functional question, why does consciousness exist, causal status of consciousness, flexible control, social coordination, integrated representation, informal access, freedom of will, intrinsic motivation, constitutive and contingent roles, theories of consciousness, metaphysical theories of consciousness, dualist theories, physicalist theories, specific theories of consciousness, higher order theories, reflexive theories, representationalist theories, narrative interpretative theories, cognitive theories, informational integration theory, natural theories, quantum theories, non-physical theories, conclusion, bibliography, etc. Okay, let's go on. So I hope that, I hope that I'll be able to get through this article during this week, but I'm not sure, but I'll try my best. So questions about the nature of consciousness, questions about the nature of conscious awareness have likely been asked for as long as there have been humans. Neolithic burial practices appear to express spiritual beliefs and provide early evidence for at least minimally reflective, though thought about the nature of human consciousness. Preliterate cultures have similarly been found invariably, what's the right way of saying this word? Invariably or invariably? Yeah, for me, my intuition tells that it's invariably, but I'm not sure. Invariably. All right. What? Invariably. Is it a or variably? All right. So invariably. Pre-alliterate cultures have similarly been found invariably to embrace what it means. Like, okay, if something invariably happens or is invariably true, it always happens or is true. Okay, we may substitute with truly, but I guess it wouldn't sound so scientific. Anyway, pre-literate cultures have similarly been found invariably to embrace some form of spiritual or at least animist view that indicates a degree of reflection about the nature of conscious awareness. All right, let's deconstruct this paragraph or analyze it. Questions about the nature of conscious awareness have likely been asked for as long as there have been humans. Okay, conscious awareness. I guess in this case, we're talking about the perception, like, about wakefulness, like what this state of wakefulness means. What does it mean to perceive things, being aware of something, being aware that you have certain experience, being aware of your thoughts, being aware of the world, being aware of anything. All right, so the questions, again, the nature. What's in this sentence, I guess the most important word is the nature of consciousness, or the nature of conscious awareness. So what is that? Where does it come from? What do we mean when we say that we are aware or that we are conscious? So all these questions have been asked as long as there have been humans. All right. Yeah, I guess like this, to stress or highlight certain phrase or some part of a sentence, it's quite, what's the word? Anyway, so it's important for understanding of the sentence. And if I linger on it a little bit. So if I try to figure out, okay, the nature of conscious awareness, basically everything else I may replace with my own words. So I may say, like, the nature of conscious awareness, what was the question for thousands of years. So people ask this question about the nature of conscious awareness for thousands of years. So if I want to talk about it, I may just, I don't need to repeat the whole sentence. I need just to remember, or I don't even need to remember anything, but I have to understand what am I talking about. And I'm talking about the nature of conscious awareness. And this question, this idea, or, whatever, was the most no, it wasn't the most, right? It's like I'm trying to make it up. It was present for as long as there have been humans. All right, I'm using exactly these words, like was present, have been asked. But my goal is to understand, like to read and understand. And understanding implies that after reading the paragraph or a sentence, I don't need to remember it, but I need to understand what it describes, like real thing in the real world. And when I understand this real thing, language itself isn't important. I might describe it using my own language. So if I have a conversation and I want to talk about the nature of conscious awareness, if I understand what is the conscious awareness, I may basically explain it to anybody else by using examples at hand. I don't need to memorize the whole sentence and, you know, be able to reproduce it. It's not important. But what's important to figure out, like, what is the subject of a sentence and what is the verb. Anyway, Neolithic burial practices appear to express spiritual beliefs and provide early evidence for at least minimally reflective thought about the nature of human consciousness. And like, again, the subject is repeated here. So the nature of conscious awareness is replaced with the nature of human consciousness, which is kind of like almost the same thing. And the second sentence is basically repeats the first one, but strengthen the argument to just add that some spiritual beliefs, Neolithic burial practices. What is Neolithic burial practices? Well, it's like in Neolithic period where there was no civilization, no cities. People bury their, each other after death, and these practices appear to express spiritual beliefs and provide early evidence for at least minimally reflective thought about the nature of human consciousness. So basically, those people who lived at the Neolithic period, they buried their corpse, like, dead people, and they could distinguish between, they could understand what does it mean to be alive and to have an experience of perceiving things and being aware. And they understood that a corpse isn't aware, it's dead, it doesn't have consciousness. According to this, this sentence, of course, we may, ask what kind of burial practices and what exactly how they came up with this conclusion. What is the evidence? But it's not the purpose here. The purpose is like to read the paragraph and to understand what they're talking about. So once again, the nature of human consciousness, people, when there was no language, or at least there was the language which we couldn't understand, and there was no written language, certainly. We didn't know anything about language. But people still had some kind of reflective thought about what it is to be awake, to be aware, to be conscious. Pre-literate cultures have similarly been found invariably to embrace some form of spiritual or at least animist view that indicates a degree of reflection about the nature of conscious awareness. And again, conscious awareness. So there's three sentences in this paragraph. In each sentences, there's this phrase. In first sentences, and in the first and in the last sentence is the same phrase, the nature of conscious awareness. In the second sentence, it's the nature of human consciousness, which I guess may replace each other invariably. Anyway, so preliterate cultures have similarly been found some spiritual, there's some spiritual view which indicates a degree of reflection about the nature of conscious awareness. So it's been a subject for, not for scientists, but for thousands of years. People, human beings, have been thinking about consciousness or try to figure out what it was and why is it here. Let's go on. Nonetheless, some have argued that consciousness as we know it today is a relatively recent historical development that arose sometime after the Homeric era. According to this view, earlier humans, including those who fought the Trojan War, did not experience themselves as unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions, at least not in the ways we do today. Others have claimed that even during the classical period, there was no word of ancient Greek that corresponds to consciousness. Though the ancients had much to say about mental matters, it is less clear whether they had any specific concepts or concerns for what we now think of as consciousness. So, okay, the first idea is that people, like the first paragraph, human beings have always been thinking about the nature of conscious awareness. But in Greece, uh, before Homer, there was no concept of consciousness. So there was already there at that moment that there had been language, but there was no an idea or a concept which we use today when we like use the word consciousness. So consciousness is kind of, now let's just deconstruct sentence after sentence. Nonetheless, some have argued that consciousness as we know it today is a relatively recent historical development that arose sometime after the Homeric era. So I guess the main part of this sentence is going to be like a relatively recent historical development, right? That arose sometime after the Homeric era. All right, so consciousness, a relatively recent historical development. Yeah, and after the Homeric era. All right, so once again, this is kind of new idea, consciousness, and it came across after the Homeric era, or arose after the Homeric era. And like Janus 1974, he probably argued that this was the case. According to this view, earlier humans, including those who fought the Trojan War, did not experience themselves as unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions, at least not in the ways we do today. All right, so earlier humans did not experience themselves as unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions. So they had no idea of self. They had no idea of personality. They had no idea of consciousness. They believed that Yeah, and probably like that's so fascinating. I mean, in spiritual jargon, I guess if you read some spiritual books and mystic books and idealist philosophers, you may find that they argue often that the consciousness is present all the time. There is no, like, when there is time, there is consciousness. And consciousness have been there forever. And it's going to be here, like there, here. And it's going to be here forever. That there's no way to get rid of consciousness. It's just a phenomenon in existence, which a priori to existence itself. So existence and consciousness is basically interconnected and inseparate things. Things. Why I say always things, not things, things, things. Practicing my pronunciation. And from this perspective, the idea of consciousness and how we understand it today, it's more kind of evolutionary, whatever, tool, feature. There was no consciousness, let's say, when Earth wasn't populated with certain living forms, living creatures, when it was just a rock, like Mars, for example, or any other, like Venus or Mercury. There was no consciousness, and consciousness didn't exist. But then somehow, like, it started, no, there was the huge process of differentiation, and eventually it just appeared. But it's very, like, this question is almost impossible to tackle on any rational level, since whatever, like, there's no evidence. You can prove anything. You can say that there was consciousness before, like, the Big Bang, let's say, or that there wasn't, since we may only guess and we may make the more and more accurate guesses, but in the end there's no way to really say what was going on. But at least we're aware now. We have consciousness, and we probably understand what, like, at least we understand that this is kind of mysterious phenomenon. It's something that can't be explained, and still we have it, and we, like, we may use it, and we may talk about it, we may understand it, we may try to learn something. But once again, going back to this sentence, so according to this view, earlier humans, including those who fought in the Trojan War, or Trojan, no, what's the correct way of saying that? Trojan or Trojan? Trojan. All right, Trojan. Trojan. In the Trojan War, did not experience themselves as unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions. Yeah, I guess this is the early version of fate. And why did ancient people were preoccupied with the idea of fate and destiny? They probably didn't believe that in what we believe today, this whole idea of free will. It's this concept emerged in the beginning of our era, like not with Christianity, but like close to. Yeah, I don't know exactly where did it emerge, and that's funny. I mean, that's another question which I'd like to another subject or topic which I'd like to study. I guess in the next weeks, or maybe the week after the next week, I'm gonna get deeper and learn when people discovered this idea of free will and how it actually became popular. Since in ancient times, I remember I was reading Plato and some other philosophers, Heraclitus, for example, or Diogenes Laertius, who wrote about ancient philosophers, Plutarch. And they don't talk too much about free will, about, personal actions, though they emphasize that, education and knowledge is very important. But, they're more focused on the community, on the on the environment. But anyway, well, let's just figure out what's written here. Once again, according to this view, earlier humans, including those who fought in the Trojan War, did not experience themselves as unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions, at least not in the ways we do today. Like, what's the difference? Yeah, today we live in a kind of individualistic world and culture, at least like here in Russia and probably in America as well. So we, on a social level, mostly we tend to believe that our actions and our thoughts are our own, and whatever we do because of our free will. And there's kind of competition, like free market, whatever. And we are creators of our own lives. And there's some laws which we are supposed to follow to sustain the community, to 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 obey. But essentially it seems that there is no fate nor destiny, and everybody is supposed to do whatever they like. And this whole idea of individualism is that you have your free will, you decide what you're going to do. There's no authority which tells you what to do. There's authority which controls the laws, and probably there's the government which controls like some social interactions, or tries to control it, to build the society, to build like technology, whatever. But on an individual level, it seems that you really may do whatever you decide is important for you. There's no, in ancient time, for example, there were probably, no, there was more more substantiate laws, and not just laws, but rules for people. If you are born in a certain caste or in a certain group, you stay there and you have only limited options. So you may become, A, B, C, D, F, and that's like, and probably you do not decide whom you are going to become, but your parents decide, oh, this boy has some, passion about like writing. Let's train him as a writer. Or yeah, today it's also the case, but today there's sense that there's more freedom, and the person, the individual, the focus is shifted toward the individual instead of the community. So that back then it was mostly about the community. Now it's mostly about an individual, an individualistic culture. Basically, whatever I want, I'm gonna do. If it's not against the law, if there's if my actions contradict the law, I have to, I have to do something else, or break the law and try to survive in this way. But once again, idea is that we experience themselves as unified. Yeah, what the sentence wants to say, that they did not, but we experience themselves as unified, or ourselves. Yeah, we experience ourselves as unified internal subjects of our thoughts and actions. It's like, who am I? I am my actions and my thoughts. Whereas ancients, they experienced themselves more like, they were closer to nature, let's say. So they were like, I'm a part of the society, but not just society. I'm a part of the nature. I'm a part of my environment. And I have more connections, more bonds with my environment. Whereas now it's like your environment doesn't make a lot of sense, since you may, no, now here we're shifting to this virtual environment, and I may live like in a small village, but most of the time I may spend on the internet and read books and watch some videos, basically do whatever I like to do there, instead of going and interacting with the nature. And this makes me like more and more engaged in this like virtual environment, and I experience like myself as a part of this environment. But again, I'm doing something to change my environment, and I am basically responsible for my actions and my thoughts, whereas ancient believed that there were gods and there were, you know, giants and heroes and like some mythology, and they believed mostly that they are not responsible for their actions. It's more about fate and their thoughts. It's like not their thoughts, it's just something that gods sent them, and something that doesn't belong to them. And now, yeah, we believe that thoughts and actions, not not by we, I mean like who the hell we? I don't know. I don't believe that. I mean, I don't buy this idea of free will and free actions. I think that it's still kind of mutual. So my thoughts, I understand that whatever I'm saying right now, like I didn't intend to say exactly this sentence, or to record this video in a way as it is recording and talk about those. I had no idea about what I'm going to find in this article and how I would comment it. But my goal was and is now just to read the article and think aloud about what I'm reading, trying to figure that out, trying to understand it better. And I know that what I'm doing right now, it's like if I say, this is exactly what I'm doing, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I know that I just verbalize my thoughts, but essentially I don't know what I'm going to say next. I don't know what I'm going to be talking about in 5 minutes. And even though there's a sense that it belongs to me, that I am somebody who produces these thoughts, I also understand that like my brain, my body, my experience, the knowledge which I had, the books which I read, the people whom I interacted with before, they basically determine the way how I respond to this stimuli. And when I read the article, I basically get some words, so some sentences, some thoughts, ideas, opinions, whatever, and I respond. So when I think, I basically respond to these words and to the meaning which I find there. And it's half like on one side, it depends on me. So what I'm saying, it's like my thoughts, but it's not just my thoughts, since I wouldn't say anything like that if I didn't read this article. So this article, these thoughts, they shape my experience, they shape my thoughts. And I can say that they're exclusively mine, since I borrow certain things from there, from the internet, from the article. And again, when you think about it deeply, about the nature of your thoughts, that you can control them. For example, meditation, when you sit and think for 5, 10 minutes, or when you try to stop the process of thinking, when you sit and like close your eyes, and you may say, okay, now I'm gonna control my breath, or I'm gonna just focus on my breath and pay attention to my breath and think about nothing. Like the main goal is to follow my breath. And then you sit for 5 minutes, and you'll see that it's impossible. That new thoughts and images will appear. And you can't, if you can control your breath, and if you can focus on your breath and don't think about anything else, yeah, you may keep doing that for 1, 2 minutes. But then thoughts will appear. And you ask, okay, if it's my thoughts, I don't want them to appear, but they still appear. And I still think about something. And as soon as something distracts me, there is a new thought. As soon as there's a new perception, new feeling, new sound, new visual, image, there's a new thought. And it's impossible to say that you are the one who is responsible for these thoughts. So it's more like interdependent. It's like you and your environment, they basically make your thoughts. But you may say that there's no you, there's no personality. Like when people talk about free will, basically what they're saying, like if they say they have free will, they say, I am responsible for my actions. And they're talking about some internal activity, that they're not robots, that they are aware of their actions, of their thoughts, and they're kind of in control. But it's not the idea of free will. Free will basically means that can you do otherwise? So is there an opportunity for you to do something otherwise? Let's say there's two options and you have to pick one. And let's suppose that you have made a decision and picked like A instead of B. The question is, could you pick B given in the same situation? If you get back and you have the same options, there's no way for you to pick B, since everything is going to be the same. So you have to, it seems that, or you have free will and you decide. But as soon as decision has been made, there's no way to say how you can get back and make it in a different way. So it's not going to be you. So when you make a decision, basically creates this state where you just go in one direction. There's no way to go in a different direction. So once again, now today we perceive ourselves as unified internal subjects of our thoughts and actions. And before, according to this view, earlier humans, including those who fought the Trojan War, did not experience themselves as unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions, or at least not in the ways we do today. I'd like to emphasize here this phrase, unified internal subjects of their thoughts and actions. Others have claimed that even during the classical period, there was no word of ancient Greek that corresponds to consciousness. It's not just before the Trojan War, but even during the classical period, in the times of Plato and Aristotle and Epicurus and, Peloponnesian War. Who was there? Thucydides. Who was the famous historian? Forgot his name. Who's reading him? Starts with H. Doesn't matter. All right. So others have claimed that even during the classical period, there was no word of ancient Greek that corresponds to consciousness. I'm not sure about that, but some people claim that, okay, not some, but this guy, Wilkes, 1984, 88, 95. Though the ancients had much to say about mental matters, it is less clear whether they had any specific concepts or concerns for what we now think of as consciousness. So they had, I remember some theorists, they had this idea of soul. They had 4 words for it. So the one word was pneuma. It's more about air. So pneuma. The second word was nous. Nous was kind of like mental soul or the mind and the evolution of, I guess the word mind, it's exactly like it's a root in the word nous. And there was another word, psyche, and it basically was emotional soul. And the 4th word was pneuma, nous, psyche. It was the fourth word. I don't remember. Anyway, it's not important. But the consciousness, so it seems that they didn't have, according to these researchers, they didn't have any word to indicate like consciousness. Though I guess they certainly had, if we think of consciousness as if it were wakefulness in opposition to sleepness, they certainly had this idea of being awake and being asleep. But if we're talking about experience and perception and understanding of internal and external worlds, this may be quite different. But anyway, let's read further. Although the words conscious and consciousness are used quite differently today, It is likely that the Reformation emphasis on the latter letter as an inner source of truth played some role in the inward turn so characteristic of the modern reflective view of self. Oh man, what's written here? Although the words conscious and conscience are used quite differently today, it is likely that the Reformation emphasis on the latter, conscience, not conscious, conscience, conscious, conscious, conscious. I guess is there any difference in pronunciation? Let's check it out.
Conscience.
Conscience. Yeah, conscience, right?
Conscience. Conscience.
Conscience. And it's conscious.
Conscious. Conscious.
Conscious,
Conscience.
conscience. Conscious, conscience. Yeah, conscience, conscience. All right. Although the words conscious and conscience, con, conscious, conscious, conscience, conscience, conscious, conscience. All right. Although the words conscious and conscience, no, I'm saying the same thing. Damn it. Although the words conscious and conscience are used quite differently today, it is likely that the Reformation emphasis on the latter. It is likely that the Reformation emphasis on the latter as an inner source of truth, it's conscience, not conscious, played some role in the inward turn so characteristic of the modern reflective view of self. Okay, played some role in the inward turn so characteristic of the modern world, of the modern reflective view of self. Yesterday I said that psychology as a science started basically from Freud, became popular, and people started making lots of researchers and thinking about psychology and dedicated a lot of time and energy studying this concept of psyche, which is another word for self. Now we may see that the whole movement, the entire movement started way earlier. So it didn't go, of course, like depends on how you define the popularity. Studying the self was popular even before our times. I mean, in times of Plato and Aristotle, there were people. If we go and look for some philosophers, they also studied the nature of nous, the nature of psyche, and later, especially I guess it's about Reformation. So Reformation emphasis on the latter, and conscience as an inner source of truth played some role in the inward turn. Yeah, okay, keywords here. The inward turn. That this means that instead of studying the outer world, let's go and study ourselves. Let's go and study our experience, our emotions, our thoughts. Let's write them down every day and see how they are going to be transformed because of this practice. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I mean, all right. So, Reformation emphasis. So once again, there's a difference between word conscious and conscience. Conscience means it's not just being aware, but it's also a kind of moral judgment. Yeah, conscience. It's something that makes you responsible for your thoughts and actions, and something that judges, something that says this is a bad thought, this is a good thought, this is a bad action, this is a good action. So this is conscience. And this turn, the inward turn, Yeah. It happened probably because of the Reformation emphasis on the word conscience and the studying of conscience instead of studying like this awareness or this consciousness, like the experience. It was distinguished from like studying the evaluation of this experience. So when we say that consciousness is just about perceiving like the world, it's about being awake and being aware that you have thoughts, that you have ideas, that you have perceptions, that you have feelings. And conscious conscience, it's more about the quality of these feelings and thoughts and ideas, not just quality, but their evaluation. So we may say that conscience, basically, consciousness is just the like I am conscious of everything, but conscience, it's more about I'm conscious. My conscience tells me that this thing is bad, like this thought, this idea, it's not good. It's it's a devil inside me tells me this. And on the other side there's God, and it tells me something else. So in conscience is like your ability to understand, since you have all sorts of thoughts and feelings, but how do you evaluate them? And when we talk about motivation, there's big difference. You may want something and it's some stupid thing, and you still have an urge to get this thing, and you are not aware that this thing uh, leads you to certain troubles, so puts you in troubles, but you still want it, like drugs, for example, right? So if you have strong conscience, you understand that if you take drugs, it's gonna change your life not in a good way. Maybe it'll give you certain emotions and sense of pleasure and happiness for a while, but then you will get in trouble, right? And conscience helps you to understand this desire, this urge, and you know basically not follow it, not be a fool, right? So if you have strong conscience, you don't drink vodka, you drink water, and you understand that it's cool. But if your conscience is weak and stupid, you can't differentiate between, like, no, you can't see the future, right? So conscience basically helps you to see the future. You understand that certain actions lead to certain results, and you don't like if you don't like the results, you don't do the actions, even though you may want them so badly. Okay, let's go on. So what's written here? So it's written that Reformation emphasis on the conscience played significant role in the inward turn, so characteristic of the modern reflective view of self. The Hamlet who walked the stage in 1600 already saw his world and self with profoundly modern eyes. So for Hamlet, yeah, it's like he, I guess the famous phrase was that he could see in natural shell, not natural, in a shell, in just, okay, in a small space, right? The whole world. So you don't need the world. You may just live in your imagination and reconstruct the entire world in your imagination, being like alone and not interacting with anybody. And you don't need certain perceptions. You may study the self. So the self, you may say, okay, the world, look at the world. It's infinite. It's just so bloody huge. The use of word is terrible. I am aware of that. That's okay. I'm gonna get better. Give me some time. So the world, right? It's infinite, and there's infinite space. You can travel, right? You may go and travel to different country or even different continent. You may go, in Africa, in America, in Australia, in Antarctica, wherever you want, or you even can go to the space. You may go to Mars. Well, not now, maybe in 20 years, 30 years, there's be an option, or to the moon, right? And it seems that there's so many amazing stuff there, and it's such a rich environment outside. So there's stars and planets, and potentially we can just discover the whole universe and create a multi-planetary, multi-galaxy civilization. But there is such thing like for Hamlet, for example, that whatever you see outside is just it's almost nothing if you compare it with what is going on inside. So in this world, yeah, I guess in Buddhism they call in Tibetan Buddhism they call them psychonauts. So in psychonaut, basically astronaut who just go and uh, discovers some things in the space. And psychonaut, you basically go inside and see that your inner world may be even richer than the outer world. So you don't need to travel anywhere. You may just sit down, meditate, and travel inside. And if you discover this inner world, you may realize that I'm not saying that one of them is richer than the other. They probably both may be they probably both infinite. But now the shift, even though it's written here that no, the inward turn to the inward turn, so characteristic of modern reflective view of self, right? But in reality, there are not so many people who are inwardly oriented. For example, for me, it's quite clear that when I communicate with people, I guess 80% of them, or even 90 or even 95, I can say exactly since I don't communicate with people too much, but most of people now oriented outwardly. So they want to they want to do something like in the world. They want to change the world. They want to travel the world. They want to, find more people, create communities, connect to each other and socialize and do things together and, investigate nature. But and that's cool. But here, like what it wants to say, well, maybe it's in science, like this inward turn. But real inward turns, like it's shopping hour, basically. You go inside and you completely dismiss the outer world and you don't even call it life. You say like intellectual life, this is what there is. And this is the one thing which deserves attention. And everything else, this outer world doesn't exist. It's not even real. It's like if you call it real, you are deluded. Right. And so once again, Hamlet, yeah, and this is an interesting idea. I mean, Hamlet, who walked the stage in 1600, already saw his world as himself with profoundly modern eyes. So some people already now can see, like, psychonaut. Again, I mentioned this idea, and I really like this idea, and I probably consider myself as a psychonaut as well. So you just go inside, you investigate what's in there, and you see it's like limitless, and you discover more and more and more. So comparatively with some people who are alive now, so we may see that most of these people is just they don't go inside at all. So since it requires leisure, it requires meditation, it requires thinking, and they live predominantly in the outer world. So they live in their outer space may be rich. So let's suppose that you are just an average person. You live in a small town or in a big town, doesn't matter. Like you go around like in an area of, let's say, 50 kilometers or 30 miles, and then you travel the world and you basically you may just even go through the whole world and travel the whole world, like, be in all countries. But an average person doesn't do that. An average person basically travels probably somewhere around his own country and maybe visit 3, 4, 5 different countries during his lifespan. But maybe now it's a little bit different. But anyways, the idea is that you may know lots of things in the outer world, but you may never travel inside. And travel inside, basically thinking, meditation, writing, self-reflection, self-analysis, introspection. And for many people just don't know that it's possible. They don't, and it requires, of course, it's about language. So when you study language, when you study yourself, you basically study this inner dimensions. So you go deeper in yourself and you investigate it. And like you may know the world, but you probably may know, like, you don't know what's going on the moon, or you don't know what's going on Mars if you're an average person now. And if we make the same analysis with inner world, so somebody who is like Schopenhauer, for example, he knows what's going on inside, like somebody who just studies the astronomy and who knows like what's going on in our solar system and what's going on in different galaxies, different systems, like different suns, different galaxies. And basically, like you may know, if you're an astronomer, you may know like thousands of stars and planets which are outside of there. You may observe them, and you may know their names, when they appear, at which moment. And it's like your knowledge of outer world is so big and picturesque. Is there such a word? Like I guess I used it the first time. Anyway, it's broad, and when you study yourself, when you study the self, when you go inward, you may discover as many amazing things as as somebody who study astronomy. Well, I guess I can give it, I can explain it better, but that's 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 what's probably meant by this like the inward turn. So we're investigating ourselves, and we focus our attention more on the inside. And inside is as big and infinite as outside. By the beginning of the early modern era, in the 17th century, consciousness had come full century in thinking about the mind. Indeed, from the mid of 17th century through the late 19th century, consciousness was widely regarded as essential and definitive of the mental. Definitive or definitive? Definitive. Let's check it.
Definitive.
Definitive. All right, my intuition was wrong this time. 1-1. René Descartes has defined the very notion of thought, pensée, in terms of reflexive consciousness or self-awareness. In the Principles of Philosophy, 1640, he wrote, "By the word thought, I understand all that of which we are conscious as operating in us." So operating in us, not like what we make, but what operates in us. Later, toward the end of the 19th century, John Locke offered a similar, if slightly more qualified claim in an essay on human understanding, 1688. "I do not say there is no soul in man, because he is not sensible of it in his sleep. But I do say he cannot think at any time, waking or sleeping, without being sensible of it. Our being sensible of it is not necessary to anything but our thoughts, and to them it always will be necessary. And to them it is, and to them it always will be necessary." Okay, I'd like to get a little bit back and just analyze these paragraphs. So by the beginning of the early modern era, in the 17th century, consciousness had come full center and thinking about the mind. Okay, so the main idea here before, people talked about the mind, and then they shifted discourse and coined a new word, consciousness, and started thinking about consciousness. And the mind, I guess, the mind, the soul, the consciousness, they may be, what's the word? Okay, interchangeably. They may be used interchangeably. But there are certain differences, and these differences may be understood through just reading these philosophers and trying to figure out what they meant by consciousness, right? So consciousness had come full center and thinking about the mind. So the mind basically is like your awareness, your perception, your view of the world, and wakefulness, this state of being aware and perceiving things and thinking about things, having ideas, having thoughts. It's like the mind is something that, and for Descartes, it's basically, thoughts come to you. You don't think your thoughts. You are not someone who is responsible for creating them. All right. So full center, yeah, consciousness had come full center in thinking about the mind. From the mid 17th through the late 19th century, consciousness was widely regarded as essential or definitive of the mental. As essential or definitive of the mental. What definitive means? A definitive book description, etc., is considered to be the best and cannot be improved. Oh, okay, like the mental, basically a mental activity and consciousness was like what? There's nothing else. Consciousness is like the best of the top of our, of the evolution of what? Of our bodies, of our minds, whatever. I can figure that out. Like what means consciousness was widely regarded as essential of the mental. Okay, the mental processes, right? So when you think, the essence of your thoughts is consciousness. Okay, I may understand that. So the mental, like your thoughts, your mental activity, basically your mind. Yeah, the essence of your mind is consciousness. And consciousness is the essence of your mind. And its experience, again, it's your thoughts. Why should we use such word, consciousness? Why we can say thoughts and ideas and feelings? Because they don't describe that you are conscious, right? So you may have thoughts, but you may not be conscious of having thoughts. And there's unconscious. Like I guess the late 19th century, it was the time when Freud popularized this idea of unconscious, and it changed the whole field of studying. But I guess it's going to be regarded later here. So let's just go on. René Descartes defined the very notion of thought in terms of reflexive consciousness or self-awareness. So he wrote Principles of Philosophy. By the word thought, I understand all that of which we are conscious as operating in us. So thought, right? Like everything what operates in us, and if when we are conscious of these thoughts, we may be conscious of these thoughts. Okay, by the word thought, I understand all that of which we are conscious as operating in us. So I'm conscious of something going through my mind, and these are thoughts. And now I'm just verbalizing them. So I'm conscious, and I'm not just conscious. I don't keep them inside. I just trying to put them out and show you what kind of thoughts I have, and probably share my thoughts with you. For what purpose? I don't know. It looks as if the more I share, the more exciting thoughts I get, and that's the purpose. I don't do it to teach you something or, to help you with your English. It's not the purpose. The purpose, like, you share, you get more. You share, you get more. And those that you get are like they push you forward. You don't stay in the same place. The more you share, the less you need to repeat these thoughts. So you basically get them all out, and then you get new thoughts, and you have a better understanding of what's going on inside. So you may know. And for me, I am aware that I have stupid thoughts. I am aware that I have lots of prejudices and some desires which I don't like. So I have quite a strong conscience. And I know that the best way of getting rid of them, not keeping them inside, but letting them go. And to let them go, I basically verbalize them. I just talk about it. And I see that the more I talk about it, the less influence they, like stupid thoughts, have on my behavior. And at some moment, I just, I let them go and they're no longer here. Whereas I remember myself when I was a child, I used to keep all my stupid thoughts inside, and they grew stronger since I couldn't. When I didn't share my thoughts, they just bothered me more and more. But as soon as I started writing and then talking and making self talks, basically you just allow everything just get through you, and then you don't need to be uh, overwhelmed or preoccupied with one thought, and keep it in mind and say, oh, if I don't say it to anybody, nobody will know that I'm such a bad person. No, you just let it go. You say, okay, I'm the bad person. That's the nature of my reality. That's how I was, like, determinism. But that's why determinism is so powerful. You understand that there's no such thing as you which were responsible for everything what happened in your life. It's just the nature of consciousness, the nature of experience. And if something bad happened and you think that other people may judge you for that, that's not a problem. You may just share everything and say, this is what happened and this is my experience and I understand it. And well, life is terrible, or life is not terrible. Depends on your perspective. All right. Sharing your thoughts and being aware that these thoughts, it's not your, by the way, it's just thoughts. And if you share them, they will not bother you. If you don't share them, if you preserve them, and if you try to stick to them, especially to bad ones, you probably will get all sorts of negative consequences, like depression or whatever else. When you share, that's cool. So you just understand it's not you don't identify with all your thoughts. You may have convictions, you may have beliefs and superstitions and ideas, opinions, whatever. You may have all of it, and you may say, "This is mine," since I like it. I like this idea, and I found this idea. I was thinking about it, and I decided that I'm gonna use this idea in my life. And then you may say, this is my idea, this is my thought, right? And I basically going to use this as mine. So I may stick to this, but it doesn't mean that you have to stick to everything which is going on through your mind. Some thoughts are stupid, some ideas are stupid. You may just let them go, even though they may came out of your mouth and you may say, this is what I believe, this is what I think about this or that. You shouldn't stick to that. You may say, okay, this is what I said because I was influenced by this particular book, or by this video, or by whatever, or by my misunderstanding, or it was my intuition, or it was whatever the hell it was. But now I've thought it through, and I see that there's no need to identify with this thought and idea. Now I understand it better. And once again, talking, realizing what's going on through your mind, and probably watching you yourself talking and, like, judging yourself, criticizing yourself, and then growing out of your previous thoughts and becoming more aware of what's going on inside. All right. So what was I understand all that which we are conscious as separating in us. Okay, I like this whole phrase, so I can even memorize this. By the word thought, I understand all that of which we are conscious as operating in us. So there's something in us, we are conscious of it, and it's thought. Later, toward the end of the 17th century, John Locke offered a similar, if slightly more qualified claim in an essay on human understanding, 1688. I do not say there is no soul in man, because he is not sensible of it in his sleep. But I do say he cannot think at any time, waking or sleeping, without being sensible of it. Our being sensible of it is not necessary to anything but our thoughts, and to them it is, and to them it always will be necessary. Oh man, Locke. That's why it's hard to read, somebody like Locke, since there's so much, to just analyze this sentence. I guess it's going to take 20 minutes just to understand what he wants to say. I do not say there is no soul in man because he is not sensible of it in his sleep. But I do say he cannot think at any time without being sensible of it. So when you think, you are sensible of your thoughts, you're aware of your thoughts. You can think without being unaware that you're thinking. Well, actually, you can, but it's not thinking. So in this case, he wants to emphasize that the word thought and thinking means something else than just daydreaming. When you may go for a walk, and you may get from point A to point B, and during this journey from point A to point B, you may have some ideas or thoughts, but you may be unaware of them. You may just go and look around, look at the people, look at the cars, look at the street, look at the trees, at the sky, everywhere. And then what was I thinking about? I don't remember. I don't remember because I wasn't aware of my thoughts. I was just paying attention to the objects, but I also had thoughts. But according to Locke, I guess he wants to say that it's not thinking. Like thinking is when you are aware of your thoughts. You may go look at the objects, look around, see the trees, the people, sky, whatever. But you actually are aware of your thoughts. So you don't think about what you see. You think about some idea and you keep track. And then at the end of the journey, when you got to the point B, you may say, like, I may ask you, what did you see? And you probably will say, no, I don't remember anything what I saw, but I can tell you what I was thinking about. And you may tell 10, 15 minutes of your reflections. Yeah, I've noticed, I became kind of inwardly oriented at the 2007, I guess. But yeah, since I started writing poetry, 2011, I remember 2011, I started writing, I started thinking about poetry seriously. And, I used to go to the cafe to have breakfast. So I didn't eat at home. I was, every time my daily routine started from going, first playing poker and then going to a cafe to have breakfast. And while I was walking to the cafe, I remember most of the time I was engaged in writing poems, like poetry. I guess it was not just the 2011, it was 2012 as well, and thinking about poetry. And I remember there was moments when I got out of home, started making a poem, thinking about a poem, thinking about something that I wanted to, creating a poem. And then there was almost no time, and I am already in the place, and it took me 40 minutes to get from my home to the cafe. And I came up with I wrote the whole poem, 16 lines or 20 lines, and I don't remember anything of the journey, but I remember clearly the whole poem, and I didn't write it down. I basically kept it in my mind, the whole poem, and only when I got to the cafe, I was sometimes writing it down, then having breakfast, going back home, thinking about it. And also, I remember there was moments when I tried to, like, there was a memory exercise, which I sometimes use to now too, but in like before I used it more frequently. And the exercise was when I have a walk, no matter what I'm thinking about or what I'm like doing in my mind, or whether I pay attention to my thoughts or to the environment. I remember, like, yeah, this time I was basically paying more attention to my thoughts. But after the walk, at the end of the day, I tried to remember, reconstruct the whole walk. So how I was walking, and I could remember, like, most people whom I saw during this walk, and some objects and some strange, situation. Not strange, but somebody got through the crossroad, or somebody went out of a store, or somebody, like, somebody looked at you in a special way, or somebody wore a certain dress. So, and I was like basically going in my mind, and I remember I was thinking about, like, like when I was walking, I was thinking about a certain idea, and I tried to develop this idea. And I knew that since when I came home, I wrote it down, and there was like a page of text. So I was focusing inside, but my perception, my awareness, when I started reconstructing it, I could see that even though I was focusing inside, I still have access to my perceptions, since I can remember some people. Well, these people distracted me from, they didn't distract me since I was focused on writing a poem. But at the same time, I could remember not all of them, but mostly like the whole road. So I just thinking about the road, like this, the path which I made from like my home to the cafe. And I could remember like 20, 30 people, and I can't remember them if I just try to think about one particular spot on this path. But when I try to restart re- reconstruct the whole path, okay, I went out of my house, oh, this was this person, yeah, I remember I met them, or no, just look at them. And then I went, oh, this was this person, this was like few girls, and this was like, at the traffic light I stand beneath these people. And then there was like, and you can reconstruct the whole journey, even though you may be not aware of your environment. You may be completely inside, you may think about what's going on, you might construct some idea or think about your thoughts. All right, so, but I do say he cannot think at any time, walking or sleeping, without being sensible of it. So, and I guess it may be also the case when you just pay attention to your environment. Yeah, it may be certainly the case, since I can give you another example. When I conduct speaking clubs, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to be as much aware of what's going on and pay attention to everything, like what people say, how they react, like look at everybody and try to understand what's going on. And later, when I write down some accounts, like when I try to reconstruct the whole experience, when I try to describe it, I may find that, I was talking with this person, or these people were talking, about something, and I was like, I'm writing something, and I'm writing my thought. So, and it's not like I made this thought up at this particular moment when I'm writing it. No, it seems like I had this thought, but I wasn't aware of this thought. I was like paying attention to what was going on, like basically looking at the body language, looking how people, react to what is said, and how they say something, how they, basically interact with each other, but not being so much preoccupied with like language, but mostly like with the environment. So paying attention to the environment. And then when I think about what was going on, I focus more about the language, and I see that there were certain patterns in my thoughts which I wasn't aware of, but which now I can see when I just pay attention, when I replay the whole experience in my imagination. And that's so fascinating. I mean, there's like, you may have thoughts and you may not be aware. The same thing now. For example, now I'm talking, and I know that at the end of this video, I'll probably, I recorded, I published on YouTube, and then I probably will watch it on the 1.5 speed. And while watching it, I'll probably figure out that I was talking about like whatever I'm talking right now, but at the same time I had some unconscious thoughts which I wasn't aware of. But now when I'm listening to this video, I see exactly that I was thinking about something else, and I didn't want to talk about it. And I basically used my language to hide my thoughts instead of just relieving them or sharing them. But anyway, yeah, luck. It's like 1688. Our being sensible of it is not necessary to anything but our thoughts. And to them it is, and to them it will always be necessary. All right, so I did not say there's no soul in man because he's not sensible of it in his sleep. He wants to say that, yeah, he was basically a materialist or realist, depending on how you used your language. And he believed that there was no soul, and he was an atheist. Probably, I'm not sure exactly, but probably, yeah. When I read about law, I read this book. I guess I tried to read it. I didn't read the whole book, but I tried to read it and probably got through like half of it, and uh, then I gave up since it was basically no. I read Locke after Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and it was like reading a silly child after reading the brilliant professor. Like this, the difference, and of course it's hard. But I tried. I tried my best. I failed. Anyway, so he wants to say that there's no soul, but not because you are not aware of your soul when you are in a sleep. What does it mean? Like, but I do say he cannot think. Like you have to be sensible of your thoughts. You have to be conscious of your thoughts, and being conscious. Being conscious is not necessary to anything but our thoughts. To anything, and to them it is, and to them it always will be necessary. You have to be conscious of your thoughts. What he wants to say? Damn it, so confusing. Our being sensible of it is not necessary to anything but our thoughts. Does he want to say that we have thoughts and we are conscious of our thoughts, and this is our soul, or what? What the hell is going on here? Okay, let's just, probably there is going to be an explanation. Locke explicitly forswore making any hypothesis about substantial basis of consciousness and its relation to matter. But he clearly regarded it as essential to thought, as well as to personal identity. Oh, okay. Consciousness is the product of our thoughts and personal identity, right? The substantial basis of consciousness. Forswore making any hypothesis about the substantial. Yeah, he didn't want to say anything about the nature. Yeah, he didn't want to say anything about the soul, right? He wanted to say like whether or not he knew anything about soul, but he wanted to introduce this idea of like consciousness, and the consciousness he used it like interchangeably with the idea of thought. But being aware, like consciousness is basically being aware of one's own thoughts. When you are conscious, you are aware that, and thoughts is basically, you may even say that your thoughts and the world are the same things, right? So since you don't see the real world, you only see the thoughts of the world, or you perceive it, but your perceptions transform into thoughts, right? So thoughts are, from this point, it may be just a sophisticated form of feelings and sophisticated form of perception. And consciousness is like the most sophisticated form of perceptions or feelings that you create outside of your, what they call it, tissue, the tissue, the sense tissue. Okay, doesn't matter. So personal identity, right? Essential to thought as well as to personal identity. So personal identity, which had been called soul, now it's called consciousness. All right. Locke's contemporary Leibniz, drawn possible inspiration from his mathematical work on differentiation and integration, offered a theory of mind in the Discourse of Metaphysics, 1686, that allowed for infinitely many degrees of consciousness and perhaps even for some thoughts that were unconscious, the so-called petitus perceptions. Petitus perceptions. What petitus means? Yeah, I guess this petite, a woman whose petite is short and attractively thin. Okay, petitus. So this is the idea of Leibniz, I guess, this idea of monads, or some forms of atoms, like Leibniz used his own word, monads, and for him monads were conscious, and they basically they created different shapes, and yeah, now I may be a certain monad, but no, I'm not a monad, I'm just an individual, but individual constructed out of countless monads, right? And they are also maybe conscious on their level. That's the idea. So it's not just I'm aware of myself and of the thoughts, and I'm aware like of my body and the environment. But a monad may be aware, like a monad is basically a cell, maybe a cell or even an atom in my body. And this atom may be aware of its environment as well. And again, like this piece of paper may be aware, like each part of this piece of paper, each atom of this piece of paper may be aware of its own existence and its own environment, according to Leibniz. I'm not sure that Leibniz exactly thought that this was the case, but it looks like it's panpsychism. I guess the idea of panpsychism was popularized after Leibniz, and this idea of that everything has consciousness and there's infinite degrees of consciousness, for infinitely many degrees of consciousness. Petitus perceptions. Petite? How it sounds?
Petite.
Petites. Petites. Petite. Petites. Okay, I'm not sure. Let's check it out on Youglish. Youglish? Yeah, Youglish. And listen something about Leibniz. No results found. Nobody uses this petites perceptions. Anyway, so Leibniz was the first to distinguish explicitly between perception and apperception. Yeah, I remember Kantian definition of soul or self, the self, the ego. It was transcendental unification of a perception. Yeah, like they use so many crazy names, these philosophers. Between perception and apperception, i.e., roughly between awareness and self-awareness. Oh, okay, perception is awareness and apperception is self-awareness. Yeah, I'm like, I'd like to study in depth these concepts. Like now I see that, I knew that I was going through these books and terms and notions while reading German philosophers, English philosophers, French philosophers. But now I see it more. It's like I talk about it and I see that I can understand it way better. So, for example, the difference between perception and apperception, I never really was able to figure out what it was. I didn't care. I didn't give this might matter too much attention, but now I see like awareness, and self-awareness, and that's cool. Like perception, apperception. Since I often use the word perception, but for me it's still, yeah, I can substitute. I can use it interchangeably with the word awareness, like perception, awareness, but apperception, like self-awareness. For Leibniz, there's difference. That's cool. It may be useful. Anyway, in the monadology, 1720, he also offered his famous analogy of the meal to express his belief that consciousness could not arise from mere matter. So famous analogy of the meal. Like, what is this famous analogy? I'm not, probably later I'll check it out, but not now. Now I'm gonna go on, and I think, oh man, I just started, and I already spent a couple of hours, almost a couple of hours, I guess, talking. Yeah, is it a couple of hours? When did I start? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk for 3 hours today. I'm gonna finish soon. I'm gonna read this paragraph to the end and finish. I'm not gonna go deeper since I don't have too much time and I don't have too much energy. Anyway, in the monadology, he also offered his famous knowledge of the meal to express his belief that consciousness could not arise from mere matter. He asked his reader to imagine someone walking through an expanded brain as one would walk through a meal, and observing all its mechanical operations, which for Leibniz exhausted its physical nature. Nowhere, he asserts, would such an observer see any conscious thoughts. Conscious thoughts. Despite Leibniz's recognition of the possibility of unconscious thought, for most of the next 2 centuries, the domains of thought and consciousness were regarded as more or less the same. Associationists, associationist psychology, whether pursued by Locke or later in the 18th century by David Hume, 1739, or in the 19th by James Mill, aimed to discover the principles by which conscious thoughts or ideas interacted or affected each other. James Mill's son, John Stuart Mill, continued his father's work on associationist psychology, but he allowed that combinations of ideas might produce resultants that went beyond their constituent mental parts, thus providing an early model of mental emergence. Oh man, yeah, I guess I'm gonna read this. I'm not gonna read. Yeah, I'd like to get thoroughly through each sentence, but probably I don't want to make so many comments since I want to finish this history. Yeah, I want to finish this paragraph today. And all right, so Leibniz, let's just get through basic ideas. So Leibniz famous analogy of the meal. Reader, imagine something walking through an expanded brain as one would walk through a meal and observing all its mechanical operations. Yeah, it's basically there's in your brain, it's biological thing. It's like it's material thing, let's say. And Leibniz's example is that if you just open the brain, you may look everywhere, but you won't be able to discover consciousness. Since consciousness is basically something completely, it's unknown. It's like you may only perceive it, but there is no way to discover it. So you can't In other words, you can't just get in my mind and see what I see and experience what I experience and feel pain and have these unique perceptions. So you may take my mind, deconstruct it, recreate it in any part, but you won't be able to reproduce my real experience. And this Leibniz analogy. So consciousness isn't material since you can't find it. You may find brain, you may find perceptions, you may find, its structure, you may find neurons and connections between them and uh, whatever their axons, neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, but you won't be able to find consciousness. And for Leibniz, consciousness was what? Immaterial. All right. So despite Leibniz recognition of the possibility of unconscious thought, for most of the next 2 centuries, the domain of thought and consciousness were regarded as more or less the same. So who, like Descartes, was responsible for these 2 centuries of comparing consciousness and thoughts. Then Locke was writing in Discourse on Method, no, not in Discourse, in Understanding of Human, whatever, Nature. Yeah, Locke was writing that our thoughts and our awareness of them, this is our like personal identity and the essence of our thoughts. And the consciousness, it's our thoughts, it's our feelings, and they come to existence through, our perceptions, external world and inner world. And Leibniz said there also were monads, and consciousness were infinitely, had infinitely many degrees. There were infinitely many degrees of consciousness. So, and then for 200 years in scientific, but where exactly? Like Locke, Hume, James Mill, John Stuart Mill. There were lots of German philosophers and probably French philosophers, and probably there's some Eastern traditions where during these years, yeah, but it's like history of European thought, right? It's not about Asian thought, and I guess in not Asian, but Eastern thought. In the East, there were people who considered consciousness as having nothing to do with thoughts. But yeah, let's think about it. I'm not reading now like Vedas or Upanishads, Upanishads. I'm reading Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Locke. So Locke, associationist psychology, like Locke and David Hume. The 19th century by James Mill and John Stuart Mill. The principles by which conscious thought or ideas interacted and affected each other. So it's not just the outside world, but it's also like conscious thoughts interact with each other, and they affect each other, and they create a new, so you don't need the world basically to have thoughts. Thoughts may emerge out of interacting with themselves and be transformed by this interaction. James Mill's son, John Stuart Mill, continued his father's work on associationist psychology, but he allowed that combinations of ideas might produce resultants that went beyond their constituent mental parts, thus providing an early model of mental emergence. So, okay, mental emergence, 1865. Combinations of ideas might produce resultants that went beyond their constituent mental parts. All right. The purely associationist approach was critiqued in the late 18th century by Immanuel Kant, who argued that an adequate account of experience and phenomenal consciousness required a far richer structure of mental and intentional organization. Phenomenal consciousness, according to Kant, could not be a mere succession of associated ideas, but at a minimum had to be the experience of a conscious self situated in an objective world structured with respect to space, time, and causality. An objective world in an objective world structured with respect to space, time, and causality. Objective world. All right. Once again, the purely associationist approach was critiqued in the late 18th century by Kant, who argued that an adequate account of experience and phenomenal consciousness required a far richer structure of mental and intentional organization. Phenomenal consciousness, like consciousness itself, could not be a mere succession of associated ideas, but had to be the experience of a conscious self situated in an objective world, structured with respect to space, time, and causality. With respect to space, time, and causality. Well, they're so like they treat Kant so badly here. Like argued that an adequate account of experience. Well, I certainly remember reading the first volume of like Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason and published it, I guess, 1777. But there was two editions, and he changed seriously the second edition after being criticized. And usually the scholars of Kant, they know both editions, and like to understand Kant, you need to read both. So there's have A and B. So A, like I have a book. It's in Russian translation. Like, by the way, I keep this book like for 8 years. So I took it in 2013, and I still get back to this book. And this, so in this book, you may see like pages, like like there's A, and there may be B. So in B, it's like the second edition. So in Kant, in the first edition, I don't remember exactly why and how I formed this opinion. I guess I was reading Schopenhauer as well, and Schopenhauer wrote the whole like article, maybe on a book. It's like it was a book, but it was a short book, maybe a few hundred pages. I don't remember how much. It was published. Like I found it in a book, like in additional section to his World as Will and Representation, and he criticized Kant and said that in the first edition Kant was a real thinker. Everything he said in the first edition, and they was correct. But then when he was criticized, he basically changed his ideas, his mind, and weakened his own philosophy. And the first edition, he was more like a not solipsist, but idealist. More, he was he didn't give credit to so-called objective world. So all these objective world were subjective in the first edition. And he was criticized being a solipsist. And then after this criticism, he changed the second edition and weakened his own philosophy. And I guess this subjective, like an objective world structured with respect to space, time, and causality, and his arguments yeah, at first he was probably he took a so I'm not sure. Like it looks like this associationist approach to psychology basically says that there is no objective world and the mind may change itself and its perception through himself. There is no need even to have an objective world. It's complete solipsism. So the mind basically transforms the reality, which like the reality is the, I guess, mental emergence. Yeah, I guess I'd like to read about it more. This term mental emergence. It probably means something like, you know, the whole world is just the creation of our mind, and it's purely subjective for everybody. And Kant was criticizing it and saying that a conscious self must be situated in an objective world structured with respect to space, time, and causality. Well, a subjective world may be structured with respect to space, time, and causality. But what is called objective world? Anyway, so let's just finish this article. There's not too much left. Within an Anglo-American world, associationist approaches continued to be influential to both philosophy and psychology well into the 20th century, while in the German and European sphere, there was a greater interest in the larger structure of experience that led in part to the study of phenomenology through the work of Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and others who expanded the study of consciousness into the realm of the social, the bodily, and the interpersonal. All right, so Anglo-American world and German and European sphere, greater interest. So German and European were more like socially oriented, and the mind wasn't just a personal. I'm not sure, like who like certainly they're not talking about Schopenhauer. They're not talking about Nietzsche. Uh, Maybe they're talking about Hegel, but Hegel also wasn't like okay, I can say Husserl. Yeah, they just named Husserl, Heidegger, and this guy. And I know none of these thinkers. I mean, I tried to read Heidegger's Being and Time, and it's in translation, in Russian translation. And after that, I decided that I'm not good. I, he is considered as one of the most important philosopher of 20th century. But for me, I didn't find anything meaningful there. For me, it was just the second Hegel, and I decided that I'm not going to spend too much time on him since I already know how it you may just create an imaginary world out of language and 100 books or how many Heidegger wrote. It's basically most of it may be complete. No, you may like Heidegger. The point is, I didn't like reading him. I didn't like his ideas. I didn't like his language. Whereas when I was reading Hegel, I like Hegelian language a little bit more. But then after reading Schopenhauer, I realized that Hegel basically just was just language. Hegelian language wasn't as beautiful and well structured and powerful as Schopenhauer or Nietzsche. And Husserl, yeah, I also tried to read Husserl, one book on phenomenology, and I couldn't read more than probably 10, 20 pages. And I stopped reading. And this guy, I have no idea who he is at all. And I'm very briefly familiar with 20th century philosophy. Basically, my studies of philosophy ended like reading philosophers, like the last philosophers whom I read and whom I really can put in the category of philosophers were Nietzsche. And after Nietzsche, I tried to read many other philosophers of 20th century, but I failed to do that since I couldn't stand just getting through only one book. But since it was like it already had been said way more strongly by philosophers, like by German philosophers of the 19th century. Anyway, so Anglo-American world, European world, Husserl, so expanded the study of consciousness into the realm of the social. So before it was considered that consciousness is a purely an individual phenomenon and associated with thoughts and dependent, like whether or not it may produce thoughts on its own, like consciousness, or it requires an objective world. But later, like German philosophers and European philosophers expanded the study of consciousness to the realm of the social. All right, I may understand that. Let's go on. Oh, it's almost finished. At the outset of modern scientific psychology in the mid-19th century, the mind was still largely equated with consciousness, and introspective methods dominated the field, as in the work of William Wundt, Hermann von Helmholtz. I know all these names in Russian. It's so hard to read them in English anyway. William James, I tried to read his Psychology 2,000 pages book, and I got only through half of it. But anyway, Alfred Titchener. However, the relation of consciousness to brain remained very much a mystery, as expressed in Huxley's famous remark: how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about. And by the way, who's that? James was, he coined this term, like the stream of consciousness, which I use quite often. How it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp. All right, how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness all right, so we may say that consciousness, yeah, what's the problem here? The problem is that, according to Huxley, so perception, consciousness, which is basically maybe here considered as life. So being alive, being aware of life, being conscious. This was an activity of mind. So throughout the history of philosophy, there was arguments, and people said like consciousness basically it's emerges out of brain. So brain produces consciousness, but it needs the world as well. So it can produce, some people, association is probably believed that you don't need the world. You may just create your thoughts and produce consciousness, and your experience is determined by your thoughts, and you may make your experience only out of your thoughts. And other people said, no, you have to have the real world, and your consciousness is basically the property of your brain. Yeah, it appears out of your brain, but what you experience is real in itself. It's independent out of your experience. So you have to have the world. If you don't have the world, and world basically affects your thoughts. So it doesn't mean that you have only to have the world. It also means that your perceptions and your consciousness is basically the product of the world. It's not your product. It's not the product of your soul or of your thoughts. It's everything you experience, it becomes your consciousness. But Huxley wants to say, like, this is so amazing, this is so remarkable, this is like experience, to be aware of things, to be able to feel, to perceive. Like, is it really something that pops up to existence through the, how he says, irritating nervous tissue? Yeah, there's some tissue, nervous tissue, and you just irritated, and there's like different state of the world. So it just, but in neurophysiology, that's exactly the case. So if we put an electrode in my brain and just irritate my neurons, I will perceive different things. I may be happy, or I may be sad, or I may be, I may see different things which aren't there. So I may hallucinate. So you may put some drugs in my brain, right? So I may take some drugs, and I may distort my perception of reality. So I might take LSD and the whole, I haven't done it yet, but, I know what's going on. So I read some descriptions and I know that if you take LSD, the world just transforms itself and wow, like my mind creates reality since that's how it works. I change the components of my mind. I put some new neurotransmitters and the reality immediately like it immediately transforms itself. And the same in a dream. So you don't have like in a dream, by the way, I'm a dreamer. So I spent many hours in the dream world. I'm in lucid dreams. And I've spent many years studying this, studying what's going on in lucid dreams, reading dream journals and, thinking about it, reading some books, trying to wrap my head around some concepts made there, studying Castaneda's works. And in the dream world, you create your own world. And what creates it? Like the mind. But when we say, no, it's not real, it's a subjective world. Nobody else here, nobody else see what's going on. But for you, it's real, right? So when you're in a dream, when you experience this, bizarre events, whatever, something magical happening, and you just take it for granted. You don't care. You perceive it as some natural thing. You don't get crazy, or you're not surprised that there's two suns in the sky, and that's two suns. That should be there in a dream. I mean, or there's 5 moons, and you just walking under 5 moons, and and fly, and in lucid dreams, basically, you may transform the whole reality in the dream, and it's like it emerges out of your consciousness in a dream. So there's no world. Yeah, there's inner world, right? So your consciousness, your dreams, basically you don't perceive the world, but you perceive the activity inside, and your mind interprets this activity by creating the world. But in the same way, you create the world when you look outside. So there is some activity in your mind as well, but you focus it on the outside, and you create the world, and we like create it together. But then you go inside, and there's like personal world, and it's infinite, and you create it alone, and it's the same like your mind creates in the same way. Yeah, but it's very problematic, since there's lots of arguments, and nobody actually knows how it works. Nobody knows. Like, we may take a human being, we may analyze everything, put a yesterday I watched the video by Lex Friedman, the last podcast with this guy. Yeah, I may just show you. It's better to see once than to describe 100 times. So they had these magic hats which could record their brain activities, and I didn't watch the whole thing, just a little bit. Yeah. So this is like what's going on.
All right. So let's. The objective of this, I'm going to tell you some jokes, and your objective is to not smile.
So basically, like this, I'm not going to comment on that, but the idea of you basically put some tool, and you use that tool to record your brain activity and see how your brain interprets certain things, and which patterns, what's going on in your mind, which patterns are okay. Can't. Yeah, I got lost. Let's get back to the article. So Huxley, says, it's impossible to understand what's going on. Even creating such tools like these magical hats, it still doesn't allow us to understand the consciousness. So we may measure everything, we may measure what's going on in our brains, but it seems that we have no idea how to make it, how to, like, where actually the consciousness exists. Like, it must exist in the world, but where is the world? Like, it's only possible to experience the world through consciousness, and you have to have it. If you don't have consciousness, you don't experience the world. And outside of the consciousness, like we may have two consciousness, let's say two people, and we may say this is the world, but yeah, we may point out some objects and say this is the real world. But if there's no people, like whether or not this object is real, like nobody is here to say and how to understand it. Like, yeah, you may just get mad studying this, but it, like, no, for me it's funny. I like to, now I understand it a little bit more. I at least I'm have a conversation, and talk about consciousness a little bit more in depth. The early 20th century saw the eclipse of consciousness from scientific psychology, especially in the United States, with the rise of behaviorism, Watson Skinner. Though movements such as Gestalt Psychology kept it a matter of ongoing scientific concern in Europe, Köhler, Kafka. In the 1960s, the grip of behaviorism weakened with the rise of cognitive psychology and its emphasis on information processing and the modeling of the internal mental processes. Neisser, Gardiner. However, despite the renewed emphasis on explaining cognitive capacities such as memory, perception, and language comprehension, consciousness remained a largely neglected topic for several further decades. All right, so Watson, Skinner, I've read, what was the book? The Science of Human Behavior. Yes, The Science of Human Behavior. It was one of the first books which I read in English. I've read Skinner in English, and this reinforcement, punishment, reward. Yeah, there were so many amazing terms and notions and descriptions how he trained pigeons, and how he basically taught certain organisms to behave in a certain way. And it was an outstanding book, and about control. Yes, like how media controls you. I was thinking about it, like how information and certain stimulus may basically condition your behavior, and how you may condition your behavior if you want. And I use it for personal development as well. So I try to, one of the simplest example was that I try to make self-talks before eating, and I've realized that it's a very substantial stimuli. So you just have a self-talk, and then you eat, you have positive reinforcement, and the next time when you do self-talk, you feel better. So, and if you just tie your self-talk to some positive reinforcement, some food, or some other pleasure activities, you may just, if you hate talking to yourself, you still may develop a kind of sense of joy and necessity of doing this experience. And whenever you tie one experience to another, one habit to another, it's the better way to develop habits. So instead of just thinking, okay, I'm gonna write my diary every day for 10 minutes. So you may just decide to develop this habit, and then you don't tie it to anything else, or you tie it to something negative, or you are not aware. Like you just decide, but you don't know how you are going to do that. So you most likely are going to fail. But if you think about it from kind of behavioristical perspective, it's like from scientific perspective, let's say. So you say, all right, I want to write for 10 minutes, but when exactly? I need to do that. I need to find a habit, which I already have. Let's suppose you brush your teeth, and you decide, okay, I brush my teeth every day, right? But, and I know it exactly that I brush my teeth every day. So I need to stick this habit to brushing teeth. So anytime after brushing teeth, I have to sit down and write for 10 minutes, or before brushing teeth. And brushing teeth, it's like this kind of natural experience, neutral. So you brush your teeth and you don't have you don't have any emotions. It's basically, sometimes it's even kind of, obligation, and you do it unwillingly. Whereas doing something positive, sounds like getting food, like having breakfast. So before breakfast, if you tie like 10 minutes of writing to this activity, so before having breakfast, you just try it for 10 minutes, and you are able to do it like for 3, 4, 5 days. So you may create a pattern, and then you will have a certain feeling before having breakfast. If you forgot to write, you're not allow yourself to have breakfast, and then you'll just develop a natural pattern. Or any other habits. For example, I do lots of exercises at morning. Basically, my morning routine, it's before I go on the internet, I do a morning routine, and it takes me like 2 hours, usually more, usually less, but basically there are 2 hours, and there are various exercises which I do, and I develop them one by one. So it's like, first you have 5-minute exercise, you are able to maintain it on a regular basis. Then you go on and add something new, add some other 5 minutes and do something else, and then you just develop your routine. Like it's like you stick to it, and you do all these things. But the problem with that is that at some moment you may just make the entire day of make the routine of the entire day, and then you have to destroy it. And when you destroy one thing, like the whole this card house just falls apart. And yeah, I there were so many successful, non-successful attempts. There were so many, like I call it like rise and fall. And in my life, in my journal, like this one and prosa, I can't open, like I'll open, but there's since I'm recording it on Zoom, like there's something that you can't see, but I can see. And when I need to open a new tab, new tab. When I need to open a new tab, I can't open it here since Zoom, there's a Zoom table, and it basically blocks these new tabs. So that's why I can't open a new tab here. Like if I put my cursor a little bit upper, it's blocked immediately by the Zoom panel. But anyway, just want to say why I just spend so much time here often. So what was I going to share? Yeah, prosa. Yeah, here, like these 1029 notes, which were, it's like my experience from 2008 to 2016. So the last note was made 11,232. It's August of 2016. And I use my personal scale. So it's like the days of my life, basically. I calculate time. I usually focus on the days of my life instead of thinking about dates. I know for now it's May 26. And I know, like I'm aware that there's May 26, 2021. But I'm also aware that today is 12,990 something. I wouldn't say exactly what. Now I don't lead my journal, and I can't tell you exactly the day. But when I lead my journals, I know exactly what kind of day. But I know it's like 12,990 something. I know like in 10 days, I'm going to celebrate my 13,000 day of life. That's so funny. But anyway, so here on prosa, there's like since 2008 till 2016, I was basically writing almost every day, but there was like rises and falls. And I remember there were some periods when I just started building some habits, like daily habits, like physical exercises, mental exercises, studying exercises. And sometimes I could build a new like kind of routine for half a year, doing nothing bad, like focusing, being aware of everything I was doing, and like good conscience. So doing nothing what my let's say my devil told me to do, like playing video games, smoking, drinking, whatever. But then at some moments I just filled my routine with, I didn't have free time. I didn't have anything what I didn't do like freely. I mean, all my routine was basically focused on certain actions, and I couldn't choose anything since it was so what's the word? So tightly organized that I had a very little space, and then I had to destroy the whole routine. Since if I just stop doing something, I may just lose everything. If I stop, for example, making morning exercises, then I'll probably will not record the video, or then I'll probably will not do self-talk. Or if I stop writing my journal, I'll probably forget about half of my exercises, which I'm doing on a regular basis. And and again, like half a year, you rise up and you control everything. You develop new habits. Then you crash, find play video games I was playing video games for a couple of weeks, and then I start from the beginning again, reconstructing those habits which I thought were the most important, getting rid of others, creating new routine, like working for another half a year, developing new ideas, developing new sciences, learning new habits, learning new skills, and then another crash. Then I play video games again. Then I get back and playing again, and and it was like for 8 years. And eventually, it was like crazy experience. But no, this is a journal. Yeah, I guess it's gonna be popular in maybe in a decade, since now there's there's 500 readers a week. 500, no, not in a week, in 2 weeks. So every day there's like 40, 50 new readers. And I haven't been published anything for 3 months, almost for 4 months. So I stopped publishing this journal. And before journal, I was writing my poems here and my other essays and some thoughts and some, even some novels. Like this is my first novel, which I wrote. There's some, mostly it's like poems and philosophical essays. But then I started like publishing. When I shifted to English, it was exactly the time when I started thinking in English. I decided to publish everything which I wrote in Russian. And before I couldn't publish everything since there's so much crap at the beginning, like 1008. I feel embarrassed when I read anything which I wrote 1008, and I didn't intend to publish it. But then I realized, who the fuck cares? All right, I'll just publish everything just to show how from like being a fucking idiot, I just transformed myself into a kind of philosopher by doing certain things, studying certain things, learning and like developing myself, basically studying philosophy and literature and learning. Not and studying, by studying I don't mean just reading and listening to some lectures, but mostly like active studying, so writing, thinking, speaking about it, etc. All right, so Skinner, I mentioned Skinner. Yeah, this book, Science and Human Behavior, I recommend anybody to read this book. It's very impressive and transformative. Anyway, through movements as Gestalt Psychology, Köhler, Kafka. Yeah, there's no idea. The idea is that the early 20th century saw the eclipse of consciousness from scientific psychology, especially in the United States, with the rise of behaviorism. So eclipse means like no more consciousness. Let's study behaviorism, right? Consciousness, we can't say anything about consciousness. We only may study humans' behavior. And from studying humans' behavior, we study like psychology instead of studying some, inner perception and how people perceive the world, what they see, how they interpret it. Let's study their behavior, since we can see it, we can observe it, we can find some patterns, etc. Yeah, and Gestalt psychology also was focused on what? No, though movements such as Gestalt psychology kept it a matter of ongoing scientific concern. So Gestalt psychology still was focusing on consciousness, not only on consciousness, but Gestalt means the whole, and it's like there are some concepts like figure and ground, figure and ground. So you may check it out on the internet and Wikipedia. I don't remember exactly what was good. Like Gestalt is more about it's like practical psychology, how to deal with what to do with your life. Gestalt, yeah, perception, yeah, exactly. Gestalt is like how you perceive. So you change the figure, the ground, and there's differences in perception and attention and whatever. Anyway, I don't want to talk about too much. In the 1960s, the group of behaviorism weakened with the rise of cognitive psychology, and they started studying again consciousness, information processing, and modeling of the internal mental processes. Here, despite their renewed emphasis on the explaining cognitive capacities such as memory, perception, and language comprehension, consciousness remained a largely neglected topic for several further decades. So in the 1980s and 90s, there was a major resurgence of scientific and philosophical research into the nature and the basis of consciousness. Some people, Bars, Dennett, Penrose, Greek, Likan, Chalmers. Yeah, I've watched few lectures by Dennett, one lecture by Penrose, and I have no idea who are the other people. Once consciousness was back under discussion, there was a rapid proliferation of research. What's the right way of pronouncing this word? Proliferation of research with a flood of books and articles, as well as the introduction of specialty journals, the Journal of Consciousness Studies, Consciousness and Cognition, Psyche, professional societies, Association of the Scientific Study of Consciousness, ASSC, and annual conferences devoted exclusively to its investigation, the science of consciousness. All right, I've got through the whole paragraph here, the whole chapter, the history of the issue. So tomorrow I'm going to go on and read Creature Consciousness. But for today, it's enough. Yeah, I've been talking for a couple of hours. I'm a little bit exhausted mentally since it's, talking is hard, but thinking aloud, you might try it to see how it works. But thinking aloud and reading philosophical articles, I guess, now it's even harder. Yeah, I feel certain, tension even here in my brain right now. And I know that I have to stop for, to make a pause and to think about what I said. I'll probably watch the video as well in the, increased speed with 1 and 5. And then evaluate it, and next time talk about it, about the creature of consciousness, and go on. Yeah, I guess if I read an article, like how many chapters here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 chapters. So it's not enough to read one a day. I have to read at least 2 chapters a day to be able to get through the whole article. And I don't like to read it in a way, just to read it without thinking about it. So I like what I'm doing here. It's more, I like to think more than to read. So for me, just taking one sentence and trying to reflect on it, trying to understand it through my personal experience, talking about some books which I read, or talking about some authors, some ideas, my perception of the world, and just trying to make sense out of these thoughts and ideas. This is why I'm doing that. I'm not doing that to read this dumb article. I mean, yeah, it's not the purpose. The purpose is to talk, but I use this article to develop my own thoughts, develop my own ideas, maybe to remember something, since now I know a little bit better. But in golden age of my philosophical studies, like, I wouldn't just go through that. Like, if I read some articles, what I was doing? Like, as soon as I encounter a name, and basically that's how I was reading philosophy. I didn't read articles on Wikipedia. I took Schopenhauer, for example, in library, and I read Schopenhauer, and then he mentions some philosopher, and he mentions him a few times and says, like, this philosopher was a great philosopher, and he, wrote some great books. And I go in library and take 5 books and read, this philosopher. Not 5 necessarily. Usually I took like 4 books of one philosopher, but I wouldn't read all of them. I read one book. If I like it, I read all. And while I'm reading all of other books, I may find links to other philosophers. That's how I was studying philosophy. Basically, beginning with Hegel, reading entire Hegel, then reading Plato, reading Spinoza, Descartes, whatever. Basically, they say something like let's see, let's suppose that this is a book which I'm reading. So I find something like René Descartes, and this is a book. It's basically written by by a person. It's like an article written by a person. And maybe this person will be a philosopher in the next 100 years. And somebody else is going to read these books and find this article. In this book, he mentions René Descartes, right? And René Descartes defined the very notion of thought in terms of reflexive consciousness and self-awareness and the principles of philosophy he wrote. So and after I read this sentence, I would take a book, like the whole book, the principles of philosophy, and I'm going to read the whole book. And that's, like, as I said, that was my golden age of studying philosophy. I had almost all my time available for the studies, and to get through the book for me, it was just a few days. And when I was reading in Russian, I could read books like, a book, 500 pages, I could read it in 3 days, 150 pages a day. I may just read a book only because I was, I found some amazing sentence, or, in shopping gallery, lots of amazing, quotes. And I could find an amazing quote, I could like it, and I could take the whole book and read the entire book just to understand the quote. And yeah, it's like, as I said, it's like reading hundreds of books and just, doing exercises to maintain my physical health, just walking, running, going to banya, to Severodorодny for swimming, and doing physical exercise like morning routine, gymnastics, practicing martial arts. Yeah, but mostly focusing on books and on thoughts and developments. But now, yeah, I can't allow myself to do that. So I have very limited time, and I can't read books since, if I want to study the concept of consciousness, yeah, I already read all of these books. Now what I need to do is just to remember these philosophers and probably check out some of their books and some of their chapters in these books. Yeah, basically, see, I have limited time. If I had more time, I would probably take this book. I really like to, check it out and see at least a paragraph where this quote is taken from. And in better times, I would do that. So I'll just take, I can do it. Oh, damn it! What happened? Hey, bring me back. All right, so. All right, now I'm back. So I can take in like golden age of my philosophical studies, I could take the whole book and read it, but now I can't even read the paragraph since I want to study the concept. And I guess my way of studying shifted from studying books and studying personalities like philosophers. So I could take like the collected works of certain person and read them, but now it's mostly about like ideas. So I got consciousness is an idea which I like to understand, and I just go through articles and trying to understand it by reading some quotes and some, just through the language and through my own perceptions. So I also try to understand it by, by analyzing my perceptions and my experience and thinking about it. All right, so I guess now it's time to stop here. I'm going to be back, probably not tomorrow. Yeah, now I see that I won't be able to read the entire article in the same way. So, but I want to read it anyway. And you know what I'm going to do? So I'm going to read it alone. Like today, probably I'll dedicate a couple of hours, and I'm going to read it without talking about it, without recording myself. And tomorrow I'll start like, from the place where I'll reach today. Or if I will not have enough energy tomorrow, I'll probably come back at the next day on Wednesday. No, not on Wednesday, on Friday. But anyway, yeah, the main idea is that I'm really excited about these videos, about these streams, studying streams, but they may be not consistent since it's quite hard to get through like such long articles and talk about every sentence, and it requires a lot of time, and I don't have so much time and so much energy. But anyway, if you watch it, like you may do it on your own. If you want to understand the concept of consciousness, you may just go through this article and try to do the same. Try to like read one sentence and then think about it for a couple of minutes, then read another one, then try to make sense of the entire paragraph, the entire chapter, the entire article. That's all for today. See you next time. Subscribe to this channel, write comments, have fun, and do whatever you like. I'm not here to advise you anything, by the way. Bye-bye.